What if the most dangerous thing a man could do is nothing at all? Not rebellion, not violence, not conquest, just the refusal to marry. In 1960, nearly every man took that leap. Today, half stand at the edge of the bridge and whisper, "No thanks." And that whisper terrifies society, because a man who refuses the script doesn't just protect himself, he exposes everyone else who followed blindly. Nietzsche called this the death of the herd instinct. Marcus Aurelius called it sovereignty of the soul, and together, they reveal why the single man isn't a failure, he's a threat. If you want more truths that society fears, subscribe to Mind Mythos. Because here, philosophy isn't just studied, it's weaponized. Imagine being told since childhood, if everyone jumped off a bridge, would you jump too? It was meant to be a lesson against blind imitation. Yet marriage became that very bridge, one so tall, so crowded, that most never stopped to ask what waited at the bottom. In 1960, the answer was simple. 90% of adults married. It wasn't a decision. It was an inevitability. Like lining up for rationed bread, you did it because everyone else did. Today, only half of adults marry. 25% of millennials will never marry at all. And Gen Z? Their silence says everything. Yet the illusion persists, as though the line to the bridge still stretches endlessly, as though everyone is doing it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most weren't jumping for joy. They were jumping because they were told to. Nietzsche had a word for this: the herd instinct. The blind obedience to social scripts, the comfort of not thinking, the security of moving with the mass, even if the mass is heading toward the cliff. Watch how it plays out. Families still ask, when will you settle down? Movies still end with weddings, not solitude. Dating apps sell you the illusion that without coupling, you're incomplete. It's not love driving this. It's programming. A ritualized reflex disguised as destiny. And like lemmings rushing forward, the crowd leaps, not because they've examined the plunge, but because questioning the plunge would mean questioning everyone who went before them. That is the true function of the bridge. It punishes doubt. To hesitate is to reveal the terrifying possibility that the leap was never necessary. But here's the real terror. When one man refuses to jump, he doesn't just save himself. He exposes the crowd. He forces every lemming midair to whisper, "Why did I leap?" Picture this: a hallway lined with mirrors, each reflecting into the next. Endless, dizzying, impossible to escape. Step inside and you don't see yourself. You see reflections of reflections. That's love for most people. Not a union of souls, but a performance for mirrors. Nietzsche saw it clearly. Love, he wrote, often functions less as genuine affection and more as a reflection of self-worth. You don't fall in love with the other. You fall in love with how the other reflects you. Their smile, their approval, their desire, all signals that you are desirable, that you exist. Strip it away, and many discover they don't recognize themselves at all. Modern life has turned this into spectacle. Think of Instagram couples, endless posts of curated happiness, matching outfits, holiday getaways, #relationship goals. But what is this really? Happiness or performance for the mirror. The caption isn't meant for the partner. It's meant for the crowd applauding from the sidelines. Likes replace intimacy. Comments replace conversation. Validation becomes oxygen. The trap is subtle but lethal. You only exist if someone else reflects you. Alone, you are nothing. Together, you are somebody. The cycle repeats endlessly, mirrors bouncing off mirrors, a house of glass, where no solid self ever forms. And here's where the single man becomes dangerous. He walks out of the hall. He doesn't need mirrors to confirm his existence. He doesn't need validation, approval, or applause to breathe. He is not half waiting for a whole. He is whole already. His independence doesn't just liberate him. It exposes the fragility of everyone still inside the glass maze. That's why society fears him. Because if one man can live without the mirror, it proves the mirror was never necessary. And when the reflection shatters, so does the illusion that love is the only proof of being real. You've heard it. So, is there anyone special? A simple question, delivered with a smile over dinner, or whispered at weddings when the music slows. Harmless words, or so they seem. But behind the innocence is programming, sharper than it looks. Every family has an Aunt Sally. She doesn't mean to wound, but her question carries the weight of centuries. The assumption that until you are paired, you are incomplete. The implication is never subtle. It isn't, what passions are you pursuing? Or, what do you love about your life? It's always the same interrogation, disguised as small talk. When will you jump off the bridge? The repetition is relentless. Holidays, reunions, social gatherings, every occasion becomes a stage where the single man is put on trial. Shame is smuggled inside curiosity. Guilt is wrapped in laughter. And slowly, the question carves grooves in the mind. If everyone keeps asking, surely something must be missing. That is how conformity is enforced, not through violence, but through politeness. Nietzsche would call this a social script, masquerading as concern. It's not really about you. It's about keeping the herd intact. The script has no interest in your happiness, only in your obedience. By asking, is there anyone special? Aunt Sally isn't just inquiring. She's reminding you that without a partner, you are unfinished, a story without an ending. Think of weddings. Single men aren't asked about their achievements or their ideas. No one cares about their projects, their passions, their pursuits. The only measure of worth becomes whether someone else has chosen you. The message is clear. Selfhood is never enough. It must be reflected, certified, domesticated. But here's the tension. If marriage truly makes people happy, why do the happiest countries on earth look completely different? Why does joy seem to thrive most, where independence is the rule, not the exception? Picture Stockholm at night. A city of glowing windows, most of them in one-bedroom apartments. Behind each light, a single person living alone. No wedding ring, no family portrait. And yet, walk the streets, and you'll notice something strange. Laughter in cafes, vibrant public spaces, friends sharing meals. This isn't loneliness. This is freedom. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, these countries consistently rank among the happiest on earth. Year after year, their people report higher satisfaction, lower stress, better health. And here's the paradox. They are also the most single. Stockholm, for instance, is often called the loneliest city in the world, but only by outsiders who assume marriage equals connection. Inside those apartments, independence is normal, not shameful. Why does happiness thrive here? Because freedom changes the equation. When individuals are free to choose, many choose independence. They invest in friendships, communities, and personal pursuits instead of pouring everything into one partner. They build networks of chosen relationships rather than being locked into a single, socially approved arrangement. Contrast this with America, where obsession with finding the one saturates every film, every song, every advertisement. There, singleness is treated like a disease to be cured. In Scandinavia, it's simply life. The result? Societies that thrive collectively because individuals are whole. The lesson is unsettling. Perhaps happiness has less to do with romance and more to do with sovereignty. Perhaps fulfillment grows not from dependence, but from choice. The Scandinavian paradox reveals what terrifies tradition most, that independence doesn't collapse society, it strengthens it. But to see why this is such a threat, we have to pull back the curtain. We must examine marriage at its origin. And when we do, we find not love, not happiness, but something far colder. Ownership. Imagine an ancient contract written not in ink, but in livestock. A father stands beside his daughter, not to celebrate her future, but to transfer ownership. On the other side, a groom waiting not as a lover, but as a buyer. This was marriage at its origin, a transaction, not a romance. 4,000 years ago, arranged marriages were less about affection and more about survival. Agrarian societies needed alliances, land security, and heirs. Women were the currency of this exchange, passed from father to husband, like property changing hands. The altar was less a sanctuary than a marketplace. Romance. That was never the foundation, unless you find cows romantic. A daughter wasn't a bride in the modern sense. She was a bargaining chip, her value measured in fields and livestock. Nietzsche would smirk at our insistence that this system was natural. He'd remind us that it was nothing more than a social construct, a clever survival strategy, mistaken, centuries later, for destiny. Think of it this way. Marriage in its earliest form was a business merger, a contract between families. The husband gained labor and heirs. The wife's family gained protection or property. The individual feelings of the bride? Irrelevant. Love had no line in the agreement. And yet, society today clings to the myth of marriage as eternal truth. We dress it up in lace and flowers, but the skeleton underneath hasn't changed much. The pressure to marry, the insistence that it's natural, the guilt placed on those who don't, it all echoes the original contract, where choice had no place. But history never moves in a straight line. Even in those rigid centuries, rebels emerged. Women who refused to be transferred, who spun their independence quite literally into being. They weren't failures. They were pioneers, and their spinning wheel would become the first crack in the business of marriage. Spinster. The word drips with insult, conjuring the image of a lonely old maid, unloved and forgotten. But history tells a different story. Once, spinster was not an insult. It was a title. Like carpenter, like blacksmith. A marker of skill, labor, and most importantly, independence. The spinning wheel was more than a household tool. It was the first machine of liberation. A 14th century woman at her wheel could sustain herself in ways that were previously impossible. She didn't need a father's land or a husband's wages. She could spin thread into coin, coin into food, food into survival. Independence, quite literally, began at the thread. And that independence terrified the old order, because every thread spun was proof that women could live without male ownership. Society, ever protective of its control, rewrote the narrative. Spinster shifted from professional badge to social insult. A woman who chose independence was suddenly a failure. Her refusal to marry, painted not as strength, but as weakness. Language itself was twisted into a weapon to herd women back to the altar. Fast forward to today, and the story repeats. Birth control, higher education, and career opportunities multiplied women's independence. The modern cat lady is just another reincarnation of the medieval spinster, a figure mocked not because she failed, but because she succeeded in proving survival without romantic submission. This rebranding of independence as failure hides the truth. Single women were pioneers. They were the first to expose the illusion that happiness and security required a husband. They were trailblazers, not tragedies. And here lies the danger. Independence doesn't just free hearts. It disrupts entire systems. Economies built on dependency, industries fed by insecurity, cultures sustained by control, all begin to shake when one person proves the script was optional. What began at the spinning wheel became a revolution. And revolutions don't stop at thread. What if your loneliness was worth $300 billion a year? That's not poetry, it's accounting. Because in America alone, the wedding industry thrives on one idea, that if you are single, you are broken. And the cure for your brokenness? $30,000 in flowers, dresses, and champagne. The math is grotesque. The average wedding costs as much as a new car, or 15 world vacations, without in-laws. Add in fertility treatments for couples who need help, therapy sessions for marriages fraying at the edges, and the endless churn of romance novels, rom-coms, and dating apps. Entire industries depend on the assumption that you will eventually collapse into someone's arms, preferably while spending yourself into debt. It's not about love. It's about markets. Dependency has become the most profitable business model in human history. Every kiss sold, every ring marketed, every anniversary monetized. If you doubt this, walk into any mall. Notice how many stores exist purely to convince couples to keep proving their love by buying something new. Now here comes the threat. The single man refuses to buy in. No wedding costs, no fertility clinics, no couples counseling, no desperate spending to keep romance alive. His independence is not just personal, it's financial rebellion. And that rebellion matters, because financial independence creates psychological independence. A man who isn't bleeding money for validation is a man who can think for himself. And that terrifies the system, because for every man who opts out, billions vanish from industries built on insecurity. The single man doesn't just walk away from the altar. He walks away from the most lucrative con in history. But money isn't the only thing at stake. The war doesn't stop at bank accounts. It goes deeper, into bodies, into health, into the very way men live or die. Picture this. A man slumped over his dinner table, chest tightening, fork slipping from his hand. Another man, the same age, is at the gym, sweat dripping, heart steady, body sharp. One dies early, the other thrives. The difference? Marriage. Studies are blunt. Unhappily married men suffer higher rates of heart attacks, strokes, and stress-related disease. The daily grind of emotional compromise corrodes the body. The arguments, the suppressed desires, the financial fights, they don't just strain marriages. They strain arteries. By contrast, single men often stay fitter, freer, more focused. They hit the gym, not out of vanity, but because they have the time and energy. They pursue hobbies, passions, adventures, activities that strengthen both body and mind. Without the constant tug-of-war of emotional management, they live lighter. Stress doesn't chew them from the inside out. Look at the infamous dad bod. People call it biology. It isn't. It's surrender. Men stop caring once they believe they're off the market. The gym fades. Discipline erodes. Comfort calcifies into decline. The body becomes a monument to compromise. Marcus Aurelius warned about this 2,000 years ago. He lived simply, even as emperor, because he knew dependence poisons the soul. Dependence isn't just psychological, it's physiological. When your happiness depends on constant negotiation, your body keeps score. Stress doesn't whisper, it kills. The single man sidesteps this. His independence breeds psychological strength, which in turn feeds physical strength. He isn't managing someone else's moods while ignoring his own. He isn't drowning in compromise. He invests in himself, and it shows. And here lies the next escalation. Health is only the surface. Behind the body lies something bigger, something far more dangerous. The independence that keeps him alive also makes him unpredictable. And unpredictability doesn't just threaten marriages, it threatens politics. Authoritarians always target the single man first. Why? Because he is the hardest to control. The married man is predictable. He has a mortgage. He has children. He has a spouse who depends on his paycheck. Threaten his family, his security, his stability, and he will fold. He cannot risk everything, because everything he loves is tethered to the system. He is bound by obligations that make him governable. The single man. He has no such leash, no children to use as bargaining chips, no spouse whose safety can be threatened, no nightly conversation that begins with, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" He can take risks the married man never dares. He votes differently, spends differently, chooses differently. He doesn't need permission slips for his convictions. History proves it. Dissidents, rebels, and intellectuals who disrupted empires were often unmarried, untied to domestic compromise. They could be jailed, exiled, even killed, and still they could not be coerced through family-first politics. Their strength was terrifying precisely because it was unbound. Nietzsche called this the free spirit, the one who steps outside the herd, who shapes his own values instead of inheriting them. Free spirits are dangerous not because of what they destroy, but because of what they reveal, that obedience is optional. And once one man disobeys, others begin to question why they are obeying at all. This is why institutions prefer men tethered. A predictable citizen is a safe citizen. A married man with a baby in his arms is less likely to burn down the system, even when the system burns him. A single man with nothing to lose, he is a political nightmare. And that brings us to the deepest fear. Not money, not politics, but something far more intimate. The mirror of wholeness itself, the most terrifying thing about the single man. He's whole. Most people approach relationships like broken vessels, searching for someone to fill the cracks. They speak of soulmates, of completion, as if existence were half a life waiting for its missing piece. But the single man rejects this myth. He doesn't wait to be completed. He completes himself. And in doing so, he becomes dangerous. Because his wholeness is a mirror. Married couples glance at him and suddenly doubt their own contentment. Industries panic because their survival depends on neediness. Society trembles because he proves what no one wants to admit. You don't need the bridge. You don't need the mirror. You don't need the script. This is not isolation. It's strength. A whole man doesn't avoid relationships. He simply doesn't need them to define him. When he engages with others, it isn't from desperation, but from abundance. His energy is not half waiting for a whole, but wholehearted, complete, overflowing. And relationships built on abundance are the only ones that can be truly authentic. Nietzsche saw this as the mark of the free spirit, a man who creates his own values rather than inheriting the expectations of tradition. Marcus Aurelius lived it, reminding himself that happiness requires very little, that it rests in sovereignty of thought, not the approval of others. The single man, in his wholeness, becomes proof of this timeless truth. And that proof is contagious. When one man thrives without the expected attachments, others begin to question whether their sacrifices were necessary. If wholeness is possible alone, then dependency is revealed for what it is, a choice, not a requirement. The single man doesn't destroy society. He pioneers its evolution, from obedience to choice, from need to strength, from broken halves searching for completion to whole beings meeting in freedom. And that is why he terrifies the old world, because he shows us the shape of the new. So why does the single man terrify society? Not because he is lacking, but because he is complete. He refuses the bridge, the mirror, the script, and in that refusal, he becomes proof that life can be lived whole. His independence is a mirror that forces others to see their dependence. His freedom makes their cage visible. That's the danger. That's the revolution. If this unsettled something in you, don't look away. Subscribe to Mind Mythos, where we turn the questions society avoids into the truths that set you free.